Hello there, welcome to saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground, and welcome to 6 of the best. This is the second time I've done this. The last time around, we took a look at 6 of the best Nintendo Game Boy games ever made, and today we are taking a little leap forward but sticking with Nintendo, and we are taking a look at the Nintendo 64. This is one of my all-time favourite consoles. It has some of the best games ever made on it, and some of them are games that would still stand up perfectly well today. Quite frankly, I still have my Nintendo 64. I have my original. I also have another one, as the original doesn't quite work fully anymore, but I never had the heart to get rid of it. So let's take a look at 6 of the best Nintendo 64 games ever, and we are starting with number 6, a personal favourite, WWF No Mercy. If you're not a fan of professional wrestling, this one probably won't give you very much, but if you are a fan of pro wrestling, and especially a fan of pro wrestling games, there's every chance that this game is absolutely one of the first picks you would have had. WWF No Mercy is considered by many to be the best wrestling game of all time, and I'd have to count myself in that number. The fourth in a series of games that started with WCW World Tour, WCW NWO Revenge, and WrestleMania 2000, WWF No Mercy was the pinnacle of that. And bear in mind, those other 3 games, also on the Nintendo 64, were top class, but this one was where it peaked. Quite frankly, it was years before we saw a wrestling game that even came close to that, even with the emergence of the SmackDown series on the PlayStation. This game was an absolute joy to play. It had fantastic wrestlers, a huge roster. It allowed us to do cage matches, and for the first time ever, ladder matches. It gave us some of the absolute best backstage brawls and areas ever, and some particularly interactive arenas too. For the time, the graphics were fantastic, as was the audio. Overall, this was just about everything we could have wanted, and this was a wrestling game that I carried on playing for many years. Number 5. Resident Evil 2. The original Resident Evil 2 is probably more fondly remembered for its release on the PlayStation. The port on the Nintendo 64 came quite a bit later on, and I'm aware that to many people, the port is considered a little bit of a downgrade from the PlayStation original. However, for me personally, this game has a very special place in my heart. I got it for Christmas one year, and as a Nintendo fan, lifelong Nintendo fan, this game was something completely different. It was unlike anything I'd ever played, especially on the Nintendo. And whilst it took me a little while to get my head around, I very quickly fell in love with the entire franchise. While I've never played the PlayStation version, so I will accept there may be better versions of the game, this game on its own is still, to me, one of the all-time best Resident Evil games ever made, and certainly one of the all-time best survival horror games. There are certain aspects of it that maybe haven't stood the test of time too perfectly, but overall, it's still a lot of fun to play now. I actually rebought the game on the Nintendo GameCube, and it was still a lot of fun. And even though the graphics and such haven't aged perfectly, it doesn't matter. The story is outstanding, and quite frankly, a lot of the Resident Evil games have struggled to live up to it. Number 4. GoldenEye 007. There are plenty of games that are up for debate when making these lists. Quite frankly, there were a few other games that I initially had on this list that had since been dropped out. But if there is one game that should never even be considered to be missing out on this list, it's GoldenEye. GoldenEye is a Nintendo 64 classic. in ways that most other games just can't be. I don't think there's ever been a movie tie-in video game that was this successful. And let's be clear, this game didn't just come out in line with GoldenEye because the movie was topical. It came out a fair bit later, and it stands alone on its own. In fact, a lot of time I go back to watch GoldenEye the movie because I remember how fun the game was. It really revolutionised gameplay in first-person shooters. Up until this point, we had some really good first-person shooters such as Doom, but this took it to a next level. Even Turok Dinosaur Hunter, which was released on the same console, was very quickly overshadowed by just how smooth and impressive this game was. It had great graphics for the time, amazing sound, and some of the audio is still awesome now. The gameplay itself was really good, with a lot of additional missions and content to live up to. The 4-player combat was so much fun, and yeah, 4 players on one screen meant that most of us were looking at Game Boy sized pieces of the screen, but it didn't matter. The game was so much fun to play, and all the additional options just made it perfect. Number 3. Mario Kart 64. I guaranteed myself I would have a racing game on this, and initially the 3 available were Star Wars Racer, Mario Kart 64 and Wave Race. Mario Kart and Wave Race made it to the final 2, but in the end it had to be Mario Kart. Mario Kart 64 is in many ways where the franchise really took off. Whilst the SNES had a Mario Kart game on it, and it was still a lot of fun, this really set the standard for the Mario Kart games going forward. So many of the levels in this game are still in Mario games now, and so many of the aspects of this game, the nuances of this game, were kept in all future Mario games. This is probably one of the easiest to go back and play even now. It's still so easy, so much fun to play. Many arguments were had, many friendships were ruined playing this game, and yet we all still came back together. Why? Because we'd forgiven each other for that blue shell to the back of the head? No, we just wanted someone to play Mario Kart with again, because Mario Kart 64 is an all-time classic. The Mario Kart franchise went on to become bigger and better with every generation, but I think we can all agree that this was a classic. Number 2. Zelda, the Ocarina of Time. I'm going to hit everyone with a kind of embarrassing admission here. I never played the Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. Strangely enough, when I had the Nintendo GameCube, I bought the Zelda game on that. Can't even remember which one it was now. And it came with a copy of the Ocarina of Time, an exact port. And I ended up playing that instead. I only put it in initially to have a quick play and look at it. And I became so hooked, it was ages before I got round to playing the game I'd actually bought. That was the console when I actually played and completed this game, and boy do I realise what I'd missed if I had it on the Nintendo 64. I've also since then gone on and bought it on the Nintendo 3DS, because seeing this game in 3D was something I couldn't pass up. This game, this adventure, this story is epic, quite literally epic. I don't just mean it's really good, it takes place on such a huge scale. You start in a tiny little village, you move out to explore Hyrule, you meet fantastical characters, but there's always still the option to go into those shops, the farms, and just interact with the little people. It's very much like this was one of the first times a game actually felt like a true world. Amazing. And number 1, Super Mario 64. This isn't really much of a shock, is it? This game is one of Mario's greatest ever. Maybe his greatest ever. I think that wouldn't be a stretch to say. I think what a lot of people might miss these days is that when this game was first released, we'd only ever seen Mario in 16-bit. It was either side-scrolling classics like Super Mario World, Super Mario All-Stars, Super Mario Brothers, or some of the Mario RPGs that had a semi-3D look to them. But the first time anyone played this, it blew their mind. Quite frankly, before the game's release, I had a video cassette of the game that came with one of the Nintendo magazines. It had about a 5-minute piece just showing footage from the game, and I watched it to death on loop. I played this game to 100%, collecting all 120 stars and speaking to Yoshi on the roof of the palace afterwards. And despite all that hard work, when I finally finished it, as a kid, genuinely, I cried because I was absolutely heartbroken that this adventure was over. An adventure I returned to many times since. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my list. 6 of the best Nintendo 64 games ever made. And trust me, there were plenty more I wanted to fit in this. But what about you? What other Nintendo 64 games do you think should have made this list or would have made yours? Is there any on this that you think didn't deserve it? Comment below, let me know. And until next time, take the high ground.